Hey teachers, I've been thinking a lot about science test prep. So I wanted to make a little video with a teaching strategy for all of you teachers out there. I know we have an optional science test this year, but I actually think this teaching strategy could not only help your kids out on test questions, science test questions, but I think it can also up the level of their writing about science in class. And I'm going to try posing a big question that's related to my content, not only using this strategy with science test prep and see if it works. So, the strategy that I'm going to share with you today is called the Gotta Have It checklist. And in order to understand where this comes out of, I'm just going to tell you a little story about myself. So, my husband won't let me near any IKEA furniture because I am notorious for getting home, getting everything out of the box, doing the first few steps, looking at the materials, and making assumptions about the next few steps. Now, our kids do this all the time when they're taking a test or when they're trying to answer some kind of a question. They read or maybe skim the question and think, oh, I know where this is going. And they actually don't end up answering the whole question, or they leave out parts of it, or maybe they don't even answer the question that's being asked. If you've ever noticed that in your classroom, this strategy is an important one to make a part of your classroom and a part of helping your scientists game the upcoming science test. It's called the Gotta Have It checklist. So basically, three parts. These are like three very general parts. Read the question, identify the parts, and create your checklist. Now, you know your kids better than I do. So you'll know if they can create this checklist verbally with a partner to just get into the habit of doing it, or if they actually need to write it down. Ultimately, I mean, it depends on the type of question or the test that you're taking. But if they can make a quick gotta have it checklist on the side, I think it will be really helpful, and it will benefit them in the long run to make sure that they're answering the question that's being asked and they're answering it wholly and completely. As you work on making this process a habit for your students, whenever they come to any short response question or any open ended question, you're going to want to utilize partnerships and challenge partners to compare checklists before you begin even composing responses. So you'll want to model this process, but make sure to invite students to practice it with partners and eventually independently so that you can assess what support individual students may need in this process. I lifted some of the short answer test questions from the wave and wave properties unit assessment in order to practice making quick gotta have it checklists together. But you can use past test questions from prior years that match with your current content as well. So you're going to want to teach into marking up or annotating the important parts of the question because that is probably the most important step in the process. And using these annotations to then help you create a quick checklist. So let's all take a minute to read this question and make a mental note of what the most important parts of this question are. So, as you're teaching this strategy, you'll need to teach into paying attention to the important parts of the question and marking up those parts or annotating the important parts. You're then going to use the annotations to help you create a quick checklist. So, as you can see here, I've already done the work, but I would want to talk to my kids about how there's all these facts up here, and that might be helpful when we're going to form our response. But the important part of the question is this phrase here that comes before the question mark. What is the relationship between the wind and the water waves? That phrase is going to help let us know what we need to talk about and focus on in our answer. And after the question mark, it tells us to use evidence and examples. So we also know that part of our response is going to have to be not just one example, but a couple of pieces of evidence. Now that we've read the question carefully, marked up the important parts, now it's going to be time to jot down a quick gotta have it checklist that we can use to compose our response. When we're using this, when we're using this strategy, we need to model using the word how to help us avoid just making a list of science words or terms that we're going to need to include. This checklist should help us to explain our answer. So the first thing I was thinking was we're going to have to explain how wind energy causes water waves. We have to explain the relationship between wind and water waves. Then we're going to have to use one example that proves that wind causes waves. And that's not enough because we have to use another example. So we have to find evidence in a couple of different places from a couple of different places in the unit that will help us to prove the relationship between wind and water waves. So we could practice this with all of the short answer questions at the end of each unit, but I think it might be worthwhile to create a couple of big questions for each unit and do a baseline at the beginning of the year, at the beginning of each unit, and then collect data midway through the unit or throughout the unit to see how these checklists change the quality of their responses. I hope this was helpful. And since we are coming up on testing season, I thought it might be useful because these gotta have it checklists can help our students to really understand what the question is asking and all the ingredients or parts that they need to include as they write a response. Colleagues, thanks for listening. And I will include my plain old PowerPoint. It's actually, I'm really aging myself there. It's not a PowerPoint, it's a Google slideshow. So that you can adapt it or you have some short response questions to get started with if you want to try this strategy out. Thanks. Bye bye.